We talked about the last time that Paul and Barnabas are in distress because Paul has healed this lame man, but the people of Lystra are confused. They can see that a miracle has occurred, they can see that something wonderful has happened, but they can't see why. They can't understand where it's from. And because of that, they falsely associate Paul and Barnabas with being gods. And that is, of course, not true. And when this accusation comes out, or at least this false association, that's very distressing for Paul and Barnabas. So we're going to look at their reaction to that today. Here in Acts chapter 14, start in verse 14, it says, "But when the apostles, Paul and Barnabas, heard this, they tore their clothes and they rushed into the crowd, shouting." They're under duress. They're extremely worried about this. This is not good news, what the crowd is doing. They're bringing bulls into the city. They're going to sacrifice to them, Paul and Barnabas, and they're not connecting with God at all. So tearing the clothes was this Hebrew tradition of extreme stress and grief. The idea that all is lost, everything is wrecked. We don't know how we're going to get out of this situation. And indeed, to this day, sometimes people who are in extreme mental anguish will do that. They'll just rip their clothes in frustration. They're just so upset. Everything in the world has come to an end for them. A miracle of God should draw people to Him. It should cause them to be much stronger for God. But it doesn't do that for people who don't have faith, for people who don't believe in Him, for people who want to look elsewhere for a reason why. And that's what's happened here. They obviously don't have faith, and that is extremely stressful for Paul and Barnabas. They really have two of these reasons here. The first one is that God's miracle is causing people to go in the wrong direction. It's causing them to have the wrong reaction. And then their other reason is an extreme frustration that the people of Lystra have not accepted the things that Paul and Barnabas have been telling them about God. And so their gospel, their message that they're taking to them, is not being correctly received. And that is causing them distress. Let's look at three examples here, two in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament, where someone tore their clothes because they were so upset and so frustrated. The first one comes from the book of Genesis. Joseph's brothers have been upset with him about his mentioning his dreams and his sort of braggadocious statements that he is telling them about, and they decide that they're going to kill him. But one of the brothers, Reuben, says, "Don't do that. Let's put him in a cistern, just this deep, dry well, and then we'll do something that way." And Reuben's plan, of course, is to come back and to just take him back to his father and see him be saved. But that doesn't happen. And so he tears his clothes, and then ultimately, so does their father. Let's look here in Genesis chapter 37. We'll start in verse 29. Let's start in verse 28. It says, "So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt." Very important part of the story of Joseph's life. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. Remember, he had this very fancy, decorated coat. Their father recognized it, of course, and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And so then Jacob reacts in the same way. It says, "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. 'No,' he said, 'in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son.' So his father wept for him." Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Reuben is upset, so upset, tears his clothes. Jacob is upset at the loss of his son, tears his clothes. Extreme duress and discomfort at the situation they're in. They can't see a way out of it. They are so stressed, so upset that they tear their clothes. Let's look at another example. The opening chapter in the book of Job, which is really thought to be the oldest book in the Bible. You'll remember that the books of the Bible not necessarily arranged in the chronological order, but really by type. And so Job is over here right next to Psalms. And we get the information that he's a very righteous man, but that Satan is upset that he's so loyal to God. And so he asks permission, interesting that he has to ask for that, to afflict Job, and God says yes. And so we get this rapid fire succession of all of Job's possessions are destroyed, all of his animals are carried away, and indeed even his family is killed off. And he gets this rapid fire report while one is still speaking, and then while that one's still speaking, another one comes up, and while that one's still speaking, another one comes up. All these messengers give him this bad news, and so he reacts to all of this here, starting in chapter 1, verse 20. It says, "At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell on the ground in worship. 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked will I depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.' In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." So he doesn't charge God with wrongdoing, but instead worships him. But he is under duress. He can't see a way out of this situation. It appears very hopeless to him, and he rips his clothing in distress. Let's go to the book of Matthew, to the trial after Jesus is arrested here. Before he's arrested here. We're going to look at all of this process and this trial that they're having. And this time, we're going to see a little different display. They have been quizzing him about who he is, trying to get some charges against him. And so it says here, "Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, 'Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?' But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, 'I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God.' 'Yes, it is as you say,' Jesus replied. 'But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'He has spoken blasphemy. Why do you need any more witnesses? Look now, you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' 'He is worthy of death,' they answered." So in this situation, they've been bringing these false witnesses against him, making these false charges. And so now, Jesus says, "Hey, that's me. I'm the Son of Man. I am guilty of really no crime, but definitely that is who I am. And so in this case, the high priest, in this showy and ostentatious display, rips his clothing so that everyone can see he's in distress. But it's all about false piety. It's all about a show here so that other people will want to convict Jesus. Other people will want to see these charges brought against him, and their plot to kill him can come to fruition. Now, Paul and Barnabas are both terribly, terribly distraught in this chaotic situation, and so they tear their clothes. It's interesting here that they are both assigned the title apostles. Apostles, remember, must have directly heard the words of Jesus, and then their job is to faithfully report it to the others. It comes from an old naval term, the idea of a faithful messenger of the captain who was supposed to very accurately and in fact exactly report exactly what the captain had said. Disobeying the apostle was in fact disobeying the captain, and so it was even then a penalty of death. So it's hard to know how Barnabas is in this qualified status. We don't get the exact story of when he confronted Jesus or saw him. Perhaps he was in one of the large groups who saw the risen Jesus. We know at one point a group of over 500 saw him and would have heard his words. However, we're never really told. It's never really mentioned. But he is reported as an apostle, someone who saw the risen Jesus and is now accurately reporting this information. So, Acts chapter 14, verse 15 sees the response verbally of what Paul and Barnabas have to this information. It says, "Men, why are you doing this? We too are only men like you." It's a rhetorical accusation, the idea that you're doing wrong here while you're trying to create this situation of the bulls coming in and worshiping us. Don't do this. You're doing the wrong thing. You're being misled. So then they tear their clothes in this physical demonstration of protest against their action. They also voice this simple but forceful opposition to this plan of the sacrifice. Christ's kingdom is always about human believers, real people, spreading the word to other real people. That's always the plan. And they're reminding these people of Lystra that that's exactly what's going on here and nothing else. Now, Acts 14:15, we're going to continue in the verse here. They say, "Also, we are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God who made heaven and earth and sea and everything in them." The apostles are bringing news from the living God, not one of these dead, false, made up, created gods that people just made about the heavens or somehow the earth or even the sea. The false god Dagon is mentioned in the story of Samson. The idea that he is the creator of all these things, so worship him instead, not some dead god that you made up. Paul and Barnabas are real people bringing the news to other real people. The news is from the creator of all the creation that you can see around you in the heavens and of the earth and the seas down below. It's all there to be taken in. Don't worship the things he made, but rather the creator himself. And also, don't worship this world, but rather the people in it, because your God is alive, and he wants his people to be alive with him, that they would have this abundant life. And that is something to think about.